just a little bit about me. My background is I've spent 20 years in local government, sort of working either within local government or consulting to local government. I started out life living on a dairy farm, went off to university to study land surveying, did that for about 3 years, decided I didn't really like the measurement side of surveying because that was going to get replaced by machines, but I liked the design side of building cities. So I pursued a career in town planning effectively. So I took all of the resource management side out of surveying and mixed it with a bit of law and a bit of philosophy, and ended with a complete sort of hybrid, picked my own degree really. But from then I have been working within the local government framework, building cities and building communities is what my passion has been. You can only withstand a certain amount of time in that environment because local government and governments generally are sort of Victorian sort of facilities, and they don't change very fast. Local government, as we know it, predates the typewriter, so they're not very good at using technology. Well, the whole organisational structure just isn't compatible with the technologies that are there now. So it needs to be sort of rethought from the ground up. So I have taken a really big interest in the open data, open source movement myself, specifically in relation to sharing knowledge about how communities work and how they interrelate. So this presentation specific, it's just a completely recycled one, so it may not even fit specifically, but it gives a bit of a snapshot of the types of things that I've been doing and using technology for data-driven decision-making from a policy, community sort of policy sense. So that's me, public entrepreneur now, because I left council about a year ago because I applied a local, I actually applied the lean startup methodology to policy formulation in the regulatory space, and it was such a hit within local government circles that I got asked to give a TEDx talk on it and a whole heap of stuff, and from then on there's been a whole lot of demand really, because I've sort of found a sweet spot between technology, urban design, urban living, and government. So at the moment I've got, these are just 2 of the 3 brands that I run. So one of Mashmatics is a website I've got, and it's mostly around civic hacking and applying sort of the open source ethos to policy making and procedural sort of governance type things. I run sort of hackathons and jams, service design jams. On the left, Spatial Fusion is actually a geodesign, so that's a new, if you look at your Wikipedia, geodesign, it's an industry that's only existed for about 5 years. Jack Dangerfield from Esri, who was one of the biggest mapping sort of products, GIS products, has recognised that GIS only goes so far to actually solve world problems. Because it relies on points, lines and polygons, it doesn't very well deal with sort of metaphysical concepts that aren't specifically related to space time. So they've been looking at what's happened recently is people have been applying design and sort of landscape architecture type principles to traditional GIS platforms to have a really highly iterative, malleable sort of platforms for digital storytelling effectively. So those are the 2 sort of fields that I work in. I used to do town planning, do some town planning still, but that's largely it. So what I have been sort of looking at particularly is the role of government and communities. Is ultimately what you're looking for when you're looking towards a government, is to provide some sort of wisdom and intergenerational sort of knowledge sharing. So of course to be wise, you need to understand something. To understand something, you need to have knowledge of it. To have knowledge of it, you need information, and information comes out of data. So hence the whole relationship, and my interest in open data is because if you don't measure it, you can't manage it, ultimately. So for me, is that something that Western society achieves very well in sort of a governance sense? So are governments wise, or are just pretending to be wise? And with an election every 3 years, what tends to happen is the incoming leaders want to do the opposite to what the outgoing leaders were doing. So hence some of the more tribal cultures with intergenerational wisdom do things a lot better, in my opinion. So I was saying, what does wisdom look like then in a governance sense? So current version of local government, or local government 1.0, which is the municipal corporations legislation we imported when we settled here from England in the 1800s, and we haven't changed the local government structure since. And as a consequence, we end up with a whole lot of stuff happening. So sort of the types of things that I'm doing is looking at, okay, how can we have sort of good data-driven decision making? So making decisions based on actual value of sort of time and effort spent. So the problem with having sort of asymmetric information between stakeholder groups in a sort of a discussion setting breeds conflict. So it's an antiquated system. If you've got some people got information, some people don't. If you're misunderstanding because you've got different levels of information, that breeds conflict in itself. And so to achieve collective wisdom in the Wikipedia open source, it requires informed participation. So you need people to participate, and they need to be informed and have access to the same level of information and data. So in this particular case, what I had done, which has sort of led to me leaving the council, is I said, well, why don't we use the agile product development process for policy making, and even using GitHub to have rules, regulations and rules in a GitHub format. So what I did was I applied the Google Ventures Design Sprint 5-day format to develop a whole town plan for a community of 5,000 people. And that normally takes about 5 years, and I did it in West World in 5 days instead. Was the challenge we laid down ourselves. And to be able to do that, we required all the community to be online. We used social media sort of platforms to be able to do this. But what it also required is everybody to actually understand town. So we were talking about this as particular a suburb of Carmo, which is where I happen to live, but it's 5 minutes north of Whangarei, which is about 2 hours north of Auckland here, 2.5 hours north. And so when you talk about, well, how well do we know Carmo as a suburb? So we're saying, well, this is a place, right? Well, supposedly, we'll look at all the lines, administrative boundaries on that map. So if we're talking Carmo as a place, there's the purple are the census boundaries, the pink are school zones, ward boundaries, postcodes is red, the police district's blue, the high school zones are yellow and purple down the side there. So, you know, as a schizophrenic community, because there's all this legacy issues of administrative boundaries which have sort of defined the area differently. So again, trying to find common languages. 8 different boundaries of what Kamo is, just from the data sets that are all publicly available. Really interesting things happening. So like, how well do you know that this is where all the places in this community where people go to learn? And how have the roles and the population been changing over time? So between the 2 census periods, within those schools there, secondary schools, you know, what's that, 500 people less, a decline of 500 kids at secondary school level over 4 years. Intermediate schools decline 100 kids, but then primary school and preschool are on the climb. So what does that do to communities, and how do we be providing for our facilities and making sure that we've got the resources in place to be able to cater for the population as it changes? Things like heritage and recreation features. Where are all of the historic places, the heritage protected trees, you know, our legacy sites, open spaces? And then start getting people to think about, this is just a sample, we gave tons and tons of data to the community in really digestible format. And so we started thinking, well, what do you like about your town and what would you change? So having an interactive, I guess a live community dialogue which enables us to do some sort of live decision making. And so for example, when we asked the community, what would you like, what would you change? And people said, well, we need more green spaces in this community. And we said, oh, is that right? Okay, well, let's have a look, let's dig deeper into that issue. You think we need more green spaces in Kamo? Let's have a look at public spaces. So the green area here is reserves, orange public roads, council-owned land is in teal, and schools are in purple. This is all public crown land. River margins, you've got those ecological corridors, open spaces along those. And then we're literally sort of going through how many of these are actually. And what I've done here, this is GIS spatial shape files. You can export them as KML, chuck them into Google Earth, do a Google Earth tour, because then it puts it into 3D model and it wraps it in. So what it does is it gives people an understanding of what the So the issue is not having enough land. The issue is actually not having enough land. It's something else. It's more about accessibility. It's more about signage education. And it reframes the problem completely by making this information really digestible and understandable. What actually is the problem isn't a problem. And the way we have to change and reframe that is by providing different information. Let's go on from that. So, opening government. So, okay, so in terms of what does government 2.0 look like rather than as things are? And that's a sort of an open government. And so, and this is an area, this is again Whangarei, so that's just a sample of the data sets that a council typically holds. So, I mean, there's probably about 36 of them or so there. And what I did in this particular example, I took every single shapefile data set that the council had and then asked the question, is it a good place to build a house or a bad place to build a house? And so distilled it and dissolved it down to sort of first principles. If it's a good place, give it a score of 1. If it's a bad place to build a house, give it a -1. If it's neutral, leave it a 0. So you make some using the attributes by all these data sets. And what you can then do is add them all up, perform a union between those data sets. So you get anywhere between 14 reasons why you shouldn't build, 1 reason why you should, and then you get things like here. So Mount Parihaka, it's got heritage and all of the, it's not just landscape. So in looking at this catchment, you actually have a look at where are all the good places to get a heat map of the whole area. And you can go right down to specific sites, and so this is work that I'm doing with a piece of Māori land in here where there's a marae. Looking at doing housing in here, and when you look at a specific site sort of level with area photography, so there's the marae there, they're looking at putting some kaumātua housing and training and education facilities here. So this area of land is best, and there's some pockets of land, so automatically, visually, you can say, well, these are better places to build, worse places to build it for for a variety of reasons. And then you start applying again that same sort of stuff again. So then it's looking at it as not just a locality. This is a whole area. So this is the urban area of Whangarei, right up to Kara. There's dairy factories. When you're looking at whole communities, so again, purple. This is all flood prone, Hickory Swamp up here. The school goes in the water, but there are some good places. So you can start literally using the information, the town planning in the community, sort of can start to map itself based on all of those characteristics that you've measured. So in this particular case, I did a similar scenario. This is an urban setting where we're saying, well, where's a good place to have apartments in urban intensification? And again, looking at this sort of town, took out all the bad places, all the flood susceptible, erosion prone areas are all in the purple. We also took into account walking distance to bus stops, walking distance to shops, how accessible and walkable it was from a mobility point of view. Also took into account the value of houses, age of houses. If it's too new, nobody was going to bulldoze it. The bank manager would never let you do it. If it's too old, it might be a heritage one. If the land value is too low, if it's overcapitalised, you won't be doing redevelopment either. So we can literally go down into the spatial analysis sort of point of view. So this is the most highway coming into Whangarei. You can actually get a map of the areas where all the market conditions and physical constraints are such that this is good places for redevelopment and intensification. So this is right for brownfield development, so bulldozing houses and rebuilding, and the Blackwood sort of other sort of non-residential uses. So you can get a really good sort of organic picture of the best places to build and put more people in a city. That's that one. And again, so similar situation. This is a rural setting. So where is the rural production? So this one we were looking at where catchments are, where the existing lifestyle blocks are, aquifers, mineral extraction areas. You want to avoid reserves where Māori land is, small properties and large properties, forestry blocks. And again, looking at the sort of spatial analysis of it. So whole lot of lifestyle blocks, there's no rural farming activities happening here. This is a big forest. This is that Pukanu forest that was looking at. It's actually right there, right in the middle of town. Quarries, and then looking at where the rural production areas are. So using that for sort of our town planning, sort of data-driven decision making.